Hi, and welcome back to my living room. It's been 11 days since my last video was loaded. I've made a video since then, and I told you what it was going to be about. This is supposed to be my Spotlight on Popeye video. Well, there's been a problem with that, and it's that I just wasn't satisfied with what I was creating. And it's weird. I've been okay with the ones I made before. Even though I made mistakes, and who knows how many of them. And by all means, I'm not an expert. These are not professionally done. They don't look all that fancy. But there's just something about Popeye, right? He's like this the character that everyone grew up with, no matter what age you are. I grew up with him watching the cartoons on television, even though I had never seen a Popeye comic strip, and to this day, have never seen one in a newspaper. And if you're younger than me, you probably know Popeye more from DVDs or VHS tapes that your parents bought for you because they were public domain cartoons and they were really cheap. And Popeye's always been a part of our life, right? Robin Williams has been Popeye, for goodness sake. So there's this added incentive to do a good job. Even though I did spotlights on Joe Pluca and on um, how can I forget his name? Oh my gosh, Captain Easy. I did them because I liked them, but I learned to like them much later in life. So here we are. I'm trying again. I'm going to talk about Popeye tonight, and we'll see how this goes. And maybe. Okay, I think I got all that nervousness out of my system. So, before I get into the history of the character, let's talk about something else. That is the fact that you're going to see certain images of Popeye appearing on the screen during today's episode, but they're not going to be pages or specific panel art from the issues of King Comics that this episode is supposed to represent. And the reason for that is the same as last episode. That's that King Features is still around. They still jealously hoard the copyright and trademark to Popeye, and if those issues of King Comics were out there on the internet somewhere, King Features would have asked for them to be taken down and have every right to have done so. So, now you may have been paying attention and have noticed that earlier I said that there's public domain cartoons. How, Melissa, then can there be public domain cartoons of Popeye if Popeye is not in the public domain? And that's really just how it works. There's elements of the character can fall into the public domain in certain media, but that doesn't make the entire character in all media become public domain. So while those cartoons are, the comic strips are not, the trademark is still intact, and that dog needs to shut up. Oh my gosh. No, no, we're not redoing that take. That was a good take until the dog started barking. We're just going to barrel through. I'm going to finish an episode on Popeye today, darn it. So, where'd I leave off? I think I was about to start talking about Popeye's creator, right? So, let's just get into that. That is, Popeye was not the first comic strip of LZ Chrysler Segar, better known as EC Segar. Now, apparently, that's a really hard name for me to pronounce because the last time I recorded this, I found that I kept saying Segar instead of cigar. So I'm just going to fix that by saying EC for the rest of this episode. In 1912, at the age of 18, EC decided he wanted to become a cartoonist. This is going to sound kind of familiar. Like Roy Crane, who created Captain Easy, later did, EC sent away for a correspondence course on cartooning and toiled away on it until, without any proper college education, unlike Roy Crane, he felt that he was ready. And that ambitious spirit would have probably died on the vine had he not moved to Chicago and happened to befriend Richard Outcault, who just happened to have created the comic strip with the Yellow Kid and then with Buster Brown. Richard was impressed and helped get EC a job at the Chicago Herald, where he was handed an already ongoing strip called Charlie Chaplin's Comic Capers. You may have already heard of Charlie Chaplin before. Just 7 years later, LZ was confident enough in his abilities that he thought he could make it big in New York, where the King Feature Syndicate was based out of. Although he created two short-lived strips of his own in Chicago that we're not even going to talk about, his first New York strip was Thimble Theatre. Why it was called that may take a little bit of explanation. So actually I didn't like the description that I just recorded, so let's try again. Right, so Thimble Theatre started out as this concept that it was going to be a movie parody every day, and it was always going to be the same cast of characters, but they were going to have different roles every day, and that got to be really hard and was abandoned after the first 13 days. After that, it was the same characters, but they would always be playing themselves with the same personalities. It still kept the same gag-a-day format for some time, and it kept a lot of the same dressing, like there'd be a new name, like a marquee billing at the top of every day's installment, and this was going to be what was playing in Thimble Theatre that day. And that's really where that all comes from. Now, the main characters that I mentioned didn't involve Popeye at all for some time. The main characters initially were two men. One was Harold Ham Gravy, later shortened to just Ham Gravy, and his friend Castor Oil. Now, that Castor Oil had a sister, and that sister was sometimes the on and off again girlfriend to Ham Gravy, and you probably will recognize the name Olive Oil. So the three of them were the main characters, and every day they had some new gag that they went through. And this went on for some time. For almost the entirety of the strip's first 3 years, in fact, those characters stumbled through daily gags and crudely constructed stories until 1922, when they decided to go digging for gold in Africa, gain a fortune, lose a fortune, and then steal it back. This is Thimble Theatre's first long, complex storyline. Again, we cannot give EC too much credit for this. At this time, he was still a follower and not an innovator. Remember those two main characters, Ham Gravy and Castor Oil? So they were two lazy bums that just wanted to get rich through various get rich quick schemes, which was exactly the same format as Mutt and Jeff, an older, very popular comic strip that we're going to see a lot of in comic books in the future. And this whole idea of having an ongoing storyline was not his idea either. This was something that had first happened in the Gumps. Now, this may be the second comic strip to feature an ongoing narrative storyline, but again, not really innovative. Now, at this point, it still precedes Roy Crane's invention of the adventure strip by 2 years. And arguably, the Oils and Ham Gravy are sort of having adventures, but only in the service of comedy. For instance, when Olive is captured by Mexican bandits in 1923, Ham and Castor don't rescue her, the bandits just surrender her because of her atrocious singing. The pacing also does not feel like an adventure strip, and this will be the case for a long time, where if I were to describe the plot to you, it's going to sound very adventuresome, but reading it on a daily basis, it's going to move along at such a glacially slow pace that it's not going to feel very adventurous at all. So their misadventures, which seems more appropriate than calling them adventures, continue for 5 more years, often cycling through the same locales and themes, and involve an awful lot of cockfighting. In fact, it's cockfighting that introduces a series of ever more bizarre birds into the series, and yes, that's the kind of cock that I'm talking about, shame on you if you thought otherwise, culminating in the wiffle hen, a magical bird that can escape harm in any situation. And this ties in two ways in with the first appearance of Popeye the Sailor. One is that our trio of characters want to introduce their wiffle hen, Bernice, to cockfighting, so they need a boat ride to the gambling mecca, Dice Island. The other is that Popeye originally doesn't derive his fantastic strength from spinach, although that's coming pretty soon, but from rubbing wiffle hens. To a large extent, the introduction of Popeye was EC, again, still following the lead of others. It's difficult to tell adventure stories if your main characters are more like Wash Tubbs than Captain Easy. Easy could have buffed up Ham or Castor, made them the main action stars, since there wasn't really a serious continuity to the strip anyway. Or he could just introduce a new character that could get them out of tough situations for them. And he took that easy way, or the Captain Easy way, let's say. But here is what makes Popeye so special and where he truly becomes an innovator for the first time, because Popeye is not just strong or tough, he's super strong and he's super tough. Practically invulnerable, in fact. Now, Mandrake the Magician and Punjab from Little Orphan Annie had magic, and that kind of makes them the progenitor of the superhero genre if you accept magic as a superpower. But with magic, the implication always seems to be that anyone could learn it if they studied long or hard enough. A superpower, in a more traditional sense, is something that is unique to that character. So Popeye has this beneficial relationship with Wiffle hens first and then with spinach, where only he gains this superpower from rubbing it or ingesting it, respectively. Now, in my opinion, this makes Popeye the strongest contender we've seen yet for the first precedent for the superhero genre. And for once, EC is leading the way. Now, at first, EC didn't seem to know the value of what he created. Castor Oil was basically still the main character of the strip at this point, and Popeye would be the supporting character, only as Castor's hired man. But he was still a regular, not a recurring character, and became more prominent in the stories over the next 3 years until the strip's name became Popeye and Thimble Theatre. More and more newspapers picked up the strip as word of this character spread. Despite working for Castor, Castor quickly becomes the comic sidekick to Popeye until Castor is the one phased out of the strip entirely by 1933. Popeye opens the strip up to the possibility of real adventure stories for the first time, starting with the Black Barnacle storyline in late 1929 that introduced the recurring villain or villainess, the Sea Hag. Having a recurring nemesis is also something that will become a staple of the superhero genre. Another trope of the superhero genre is that, despite being super powerful, the hero has, if not consistent, at least exploitable limitations. For instance, in the 1930 The Mystery of Brownstone Hill storyline, a strange energy radiating from the house on the hill can slow Popeye's heart rate to the point of rendering him unconscious. And in several storylines, we see that he can take anywhere between 15 and 19 bullets, but past that, any more blood loss causes him to grow weak and he needs hospitalization. There are, of course, other things that define the superhero genre, but we're going to save talking about them until we actually get into actual superheroes. Now, Olive Oil and Popeye at first hated each other, but Olive began to take to Popeye just as the readers did. And don't feel too bad for Ham Gravy, that on again, off again boyfriend. He and Olive were always on again, off again, anyways, and Ham was practically not even the strip anymore at this point. By early 1931, Olive finds herself in much the same situation as back in 1923 when she was captured by bandits. Except this time, instead of singing her way out, she has a gun and she shoots her way out of the situation, showing us how we've really come full bloom into the adventure genre. Over the years, Popeye has had numerous tough guy antagonists who can, at least briefly, stand against him in a fight. The Ape in Popeye's origin story, Bill Skagg, Jabbo, Joe Bilge, and Bluto the Terrible, a pirate who debuted in the 1932 storyline The Eighth Sea. By July 1933, Popeye is the king of his own island country, and his new sidekick replacing Castor Oil is J. Willington Wimpy. With the introduction of Wimpy, plus Bluto, Olive Oil, and Popeye, you have the principal cast complete for the launch of the Popeye the Sailor cartoons from Fleischer Studios. There were a staggering 103 Popeye cartoons between 1933 and 1942, which sometimes featured cameos by other characters from the strip, but never using the long, rambling storylines that would have needed too much condensing for the 6 to 8 minute shorts. Curiously enough, even for the three color specials that went up to 21 minutes long, the studios rated Arabian mythology for stories instead of the comic strips. Though it's hard to claim that these were bad calls when the cartoons we got, like Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, were cartoon masterpieces. These cartoons went into television syndication and were on and off the air until 2003. They were definitely my introduction to Popeye. The comic strip continued with original material until 1992, though not in any Chicago-based newspapers that I would have grown up with. They continued with reprints long after 1992. As I mentioned in our last episode, Popeye was the main star of King Comics from David McKay Publications, and this lasts for the entire run of 155 issues up to 1949 when David McKay got out of the comic book field. Other comic book companies will license Popeye in the following years up to 2012 with the company IDW. EC would live to see only some of this come to pass. In 1938, about halfway through the run of Fleischer cartoons, he died of leukemia at the age of 43. Before he died, largely thanks to Popeye merchandising, EC was making over $100,000 a year, which would make him a millionaire in today's money, proving both that leukemia sucks and that being an innovator, finally, really did pay off. Now, much of the information about today's episode was gleaned from the Popeye the Sailorpedia website, and a link to that will be posted in the comments section below. If you liked today's episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. I also urge you to consider donating to our Patreon account to help support this channel and make sure I continue making quality videos, and the link to that you'll find underneath this episode. Thanks for listening. Hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed getting through making it, and bye again.